We're on again?
We're back for another week.
We get to drink more wine?
Hi everyone, John Williams here, owner and winemaker of Frogs Leap Winery.
And Rory Williams here, the real owner and winemaker of
Wait, now that's an adjective.
Sorry, I added something.
That's new, you're adding something new here.
No, we can't, it's not allowed.
All right, you take care. Welcome back, our one long-term viewer. Actually, a whole bunch of you have joined us again. We appreciate it very much. It's nice to have you aboard. And we have a very, very, very exciting and fun session today.
Yeah.
We hope.
Well, I mean, not that it's ever, not exciting day drinking with us, but we got a really cool tasting lined up with a couple of wines, and then we'll be meeting with. Are you starting to get thirsty? By
the way, thanks for all the feedback on the organic seminar we did last year. Sitting out outstanding in our field, I thought we were.
And that's trademarked.
Yeah, that's trademarked. Sorry, but we had a lot of fun doing that. We'll get back out into the vineyards one time soon, and in fact, we have a whole session coming up on sustainable farming and responsible business practices. So stay tuned for that.
And you guys can check that out. Just to cover a couple of technical things, as usual. Check out the upcoming tastings and any of the details from the past tastings on interactive.frogsleep.com. And just a reminder to those of you on Zoom to ask questions in the Q&A and upvote or give a like to questions that you like in there and want to see answered either by us or by our guest for the second half of this tasting.
Yeah, and we have a little wrinkle there for our Instagram people, right?
It's worth pointing out that the second half of our interactive session today is going to just be on Zoom, and we do have the link to the Zoom conversation in our Instagram bio. So take a look at that. If you're joining us by Instagram Live, we highly encourage you guys to jump over to Zoom now or after we close down the Instagram Live portion of this, which will just be us tasting the two wines today. So
yeah, and make sure you sign in. We get to see all the chat that goes on, and so later in the week, it's all I have to do anymore. And so it's really fun to see who's signing on and see old friends' names popping up. And
so if you guys want to talk about how good looking and how charming we are,
or how much Rory needs a haircut, again,
please comment in the chat. Dad, can I pour you a little of the first wine?
Not a bad idea. I'm actually really excited to talk about our Chardonnay, and I want to point out the label on this because for longtime Frog fans, there's a little twist on the label, and this is the new wine that's coming out in the fellowship package, by the way. And this is the new release of Chardonnay, but you will see that this is now carrying the new label. But we've added a little something to our Chardonnay label, and that's this moniker, Shale and Stone. And we want to talk to you about why we decided to do that and what's going on with that. But first, I need a little bit of a mixture there. So welcome to you all out there. Sign in. Let's pour a little glass of Chardonnay.
Not too bad. So, Dad,
my God, who makes this wine?
What a brilliant winemaker.
God, it's unbelievable. I would give this 100 points. To be
obviously. They all get 100 points every time. So, Dad, this is our, just for those of you who don't know, this is a single vineyard Chardonnay from the True Chard Vineyard. And Dad, you've been working with this vineyard for quite a while now.
It was planted in 1979, and I started buying the grapes. The first crop of grapes came off in 1985, which I bought from Tony and Joanne True Chard, dear friends, and make beautiful wines on their own. If you don't know the True Chard wines, check them out. They're fabulous. But we've been buying our Chardonnay almost exclusively from the True Chards for now, how many years is that? That's a long way.
Okay, carry the one. It's 35 years.
35 years. It's really, I think at this point, I know every vine in that vineyard, which is not easy because this is on an extremely steep slope, or for us flatlanders, it seems like it's pretty steep anyway.
Any uphill.
Any uphill. But it's just an absolutely beautiful vineyard that we have been honored to be making wines from for all these many years. A Chardonnay in particular has such stylistic differences in California wine. There's everything from what I call the tropical fruit flavored pancake syrups, the very rich, buttery, oaky, sweet sort of Chardonnays, to those who are really trying to imitate a Burgundy. And Frogs Leap very much fell into the camp of what I call the faux Burgundy set, those who were really trying to make a Chavez or a Pouilly Montrachet. And so that was our style for a long time. but we've significantly, this wine gives me two lessons, and the first lesson is that trying to imitate someone else's wine is really not a really good idea. And I spent a lot of time in Burgundy. It was wonderful. I smoked little cigarettes with Dominic Lafon. I hung out and learned about batonnage and got my barrels from Francois Frere. And I was going to make Pouilly Montrachet in the Napa Valley, and I did everything to a T. And I think a lot of my colleagues still fall into that camp, but it really doesn't work. Trying to imitate the wine from another region, it doesn't really work. Trying to imitate their processes. I think the best thing to do is to be inspired by those wines and then take what you've learned from tasting those wines for many, many years and saying, how do we change what we do to approach the style of wine that we really want to passionately get from this Chardonnay. So replicate, being inspired as opposed to trying to replicate, I think is lesson number one with this wine.
You know, that it's kind of funny, back when I was just starting to kind of get, I had graduated from college, and when I graduated from college in 2007, we were still in this kind of transitional period where we were realizing that the Chardonnay was, you know, I think every year we bottled the new Chardonnay and we try it together. If I was home from college, and we go, too oaky.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just sort of like, darn, you know, okay, we'll try it again next year.
Well, and yet we found oak to be essential in the wine. Yep. So just a thumbnail about how we make this wine, it's fairly unique, is that this wine is 100% barrel fermented in brand new French oak, but only for 4 days. And that's all the oak this wine ever sees, just until it gets to the peak of its fermentation. And then we take it out of the barrels into a very large concrete vat we have downstairs. And there it sits for 11, 12 months on its lees. So last year's 19 Chardonnay is still on the original fermentation. These unracked, untouched, unsulfured, anything, and will be until maybe even until after harvest this year. We're trying to
we may be delaying until after harvest,
and this is what we have found to get this beautiful, reductive, very, very dry. This is the driest Chardonnay you'll find. There's no fermentable sugar in this left whatsoever. Great acidity and a lot of fun to drink.
Yeah.
I think the other lesson that came out of this is that some wines are, in my opinion, some wines are more, particularly some varietals, are more receptive to technique over terroir. So in wine, we talk about it's the old argument of, is it nature versus nurture? Is your DNA, or is it how you were raised? And of course, there's no answer to that. But I think some varieties tilt one way or the other. And Chardonnay, to me, has always been a variety that tilted towards technique having a more profound influence.
So, Dad, this is not going to surprise you one little bit based on how much we've interacted. But I'm gonna quibble with that just a little bit.
You know, we're supposed to agree on this.
I know I actually agreed with you beforehand, just so I could get you while we were live on camera.
Yeah, you're sandbagging me here.
I really think this kind of goes back to our discussion last week, where we talked about the purpose of organics, and we talked about the purpose of a philosophy of farming. And I really think that this wine, as it exists now with the Shale and Stone, and that technique, the technique that really you pioneered, that you've developed with this wine, is really just a function of you becoming familiar after 20 years of working with this variety. You still needed that time to kind of develop your own relationship and the best way to express this site. And so I understand it just a little bit differently, where maybe it took you a while because this isn't a very orthodox technique without how to get there, but maybe it just speaks a little bit to how hard it is to really get at a terroir-driven expression of Chardonnay. That Chardonnay is so, you know.
So your argument is that this evolved style, or this style of Chardonnay, or this technique that we developed is actually part of the terroir, or the personality of the wine.
I would argue that you have found over the years, and almost nobody out there has more experience with this vineyard than you do, that you have found that this technique is the best way to express this site. Because I've walked up those hills with you. You know, we go down there to Carneros and sample the grapes together, and walk along the mid hill. And
well, you did a couple times.
And the wet. Well, you know, I come on, I gotta make myself get a little bit bigger here. But you go and sample, and you're always telling me how, okay, the wedge is always the last bit, and that's tucked up in this little notch here. It's just right next to one of the earliest ripening blocks, and you're always talking about how you gotta ride the wave down the hill, and how the ripening evolves in different parts of the vineyard. This vineyard, and yet it took a little bit of took a little bit of time to really understand. It took unlearn what you thought you knew about Chardonnay, and so it took you that long to kind of understand. I feel like I'm a
You gave me a gentle rebuke.
Yeah, no,
thank you.
But I feel like I'm a psychologist here, telling you what you know.
Okay, well, I think I'm down with that.
but I think now that we're at this point with the wine, I think it really gets us to why we call it Shale and Stone.
Yeah, so why Shale and Stone? Because I have to give you a little credit on this. This was your folly. This is your great idea.
No, Shale and Stone. This is I got to give credit to Jonah Beer, our VP of Sales, who really came up with the name.
We drank my last bottle of Richemont, by the way, this week. But he shared it with us.
So to give you guys the kind of the basic on the name Shale and Stone, why we chose it. So the True Chard Vineyard sits in Carnero. So this is the southern part of Napa, and down there you get a lot of these sandstone and shale soils that exist. These kind of fractured shale soils, and that's what this vineyard is planted into. So that's hence the shale. And we really wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that the lees aging in concrete, in this big concrete tank, is the stone. And so the idea that you're really getting this expression of that soil, and that there's a kind of just a piece to how we make it.
Well, and honestly, we wanted to put something on the label because, as Jonah pointed out, 70% or more of the people who enjoy a bottle of our Chardonnay, the only thing between them and the wine itself is what's on the label. There's no one there they're not invited to sit in on a tasting like this, and so we needed something to say, this is a slightly different Chardonnay based on this idea of minerality and the flavors coming out of these decomposed shale soils, and the idea that it's more minerally and crisper and fresher. And so we wanted to somehow convey that on the label. So that's why you're seeing the change on the label. And I hope you guys are enjoying the wine out there as much as this has been a wonderful thing for me. I loved every Chardonnay we made up to this up to the years that we started to experiment with this. But I honestly think that this wine is doing a better job of expressing the site than anything we were doing before. Yeah. And so, there you go.
I think it's cool. Ted, just to answer a couple quick questions we've had,
please.
Can we talk about the glasses?
Can I pour a little red wine over?
You can, absolutely. We had a question about the glasses that we're using. You have what's called a Burgundy or a fishbowl glass, and then we have our kind of traditional Bordeaux style glass. That's just traditional for Chardonnay and Cabernet. And this guy, he's nearly blind, so it's helpful for him to choose between, for him to distinguish between the two wines. It's really helpful to use a different kind of glass. No, that's not it. It doesn't really make a massive difference to the aromas that I've found, but
this is something
it's fun drinking out of the traditional.
We're going to discuss this in the second part of the tasting, that you guys are real idiots if you don't have the right glass to drink the specific wine, okay? This is just heresy. So, this is one of the things Eric is going to talk to us about. You gotta have the right glass.
I hope so, and I hope it's something that hold on to that idea that we have these glasses in front of us because it's traditional, but we could be serving it not quite in a Dixie cup or a martini glass, but kind of anything in between.
Oh my gosh, 15 again right now. This is the Leeds Chavez. This is the south block of the front of the.
Yeah, so everybody have the Cabernet that hopefully you have the Cabernet in front of you. Oh my God, this is coming along pretty nicely. So this block is pretty special.
This vineyard is pretty special. I mean, the Leeds the family has been with us from the very, very beginning of this. They have an ownership interest in the winery. Their grapes are considered part of our estate. We do the farming there. Frank was our vineyard guru and your mentor for so many years. Beth,
still is my whole
family. You grew up. Our kids. Their kids, my kids grew up together. This is family right here.
It really is. These the Chavez Leeds Ranch, which is in Rutherford, over on the west side of Rutherford, actually pretty much right next door to our Rossi estate, which many of you we've had some wines from Rossi in our tastings here. but really just a fabulous ranch on the west side of Rutherford. This particular part of the ranch, what we call South Block, we have another name for it that we're not allowed to say because of trademark rules, but this portion of the ranch is it's actually among the oldest Cabernet vines that we farm. The only vines that are older are the other Cabernet vines on this ranch from another block.
This is over 25 years.
This is over 25 years old. These are planted in 1992 to 1994, and so well above the average age of a Cabernet vine in Napa. But I think, Dad, what's important is that what really speaks to the relationship with this wine is that we've been using these grapes ever since they were planted, from the day that they were.
We might be the only people that have ever made wine from this vineyard.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and everyone else would screw it up, so it's a good thing.
Yeah. This is for those of you who are curious about some of the details, maybe why we chose this particular wine. 2015, another very dry year. This is among the latest ripening of our west side blocks of Cabernet. And what we mean by that is the blocks of Cabernet that we farm that are on the west side of the central road that divides Napa, the Highway 29 that goes up the middle of Napa. Generally speaking, wines, the grapes that we have on that side of the valley tend to ripen a little bit earlier than on here at the winery estate, which is on the east side of the valley.
Soil shallower, drier, more gravelly.
Typically a little more gravelly over there. This is actually, for those of you who were at the drinking with us last week, we tasted a couple.
Tasting with us last week.
Well, they were hopefully drinking. We tasted a couple of wines that were planted onto 110R rootstock, and this is actually the only block.
Back to 110R, that's right.
This is actually the only block that we have on the west side planted to 110R rootstock. And it's interesting because in these 110R is famous for being a very drought-resistant rootstock. 2015 was really at the height of the drought for us.
It was the last of the big drought years.
Last of the really, really big drought years, and it was, a year like 20. Until in the 2015, a wonderful year, but a dry year really tended to bring out what was magical. And it's kind of funny. All the wines we selected that year were from 110R blocks, but this particular vineyard is just very famous. Very famous to us. I think what I love about it the most is it combines that sense of power with this beautiful kind of delicate aroma. And it really is a nice expression of that Rutherford dust character, where you have that beautiful texture and a little bit of strength to it, combined with the high tone aromatic.
The perfumes coming out on this, and this is what 5 years, so 3 years in the bottle. So it's just starting to lose that kind of bubbly fruit and get a little bit of the nuance. This is going to be the subject of next week's tasting, by the way, is that we're going to do our beautiful Merlot, but we're going to space it out every 10 years. So we're going to have, do you remember the wines we're having next week?
We're going to do 2003 and 2013 Merlot, although the 2013 is going to be from a single block again, over at the Rossi estate.
That's true, yeah.
And then there will be a 93 Merlot that we're going to kind of toss in at the end there, just as a kind of fun retrospective.
Okay, so and they could get a current vintage Merlot maybe also, so they could
get multiple cases of current vintage Merlot on frogsleep.com.
Just want to point that out, frogsleep.com. We're getting thank yous from Jessica behind us over here. Yeah, 2 thumbs up. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah.
So Deb, we got a cool question here. How does winemaking philosophy affect the alcohol content in a wine? Do you normally try to attain a certain degree of alcohol for a particular varietal, or is it secondary to other factors?
I always get this a kick out of this question of climate change is raising the alcohol content of wines and so on and so forth. Alcohol content is completely in control of the winemaker because it's dependent on when you pick the grapes, right? And so alcohol content is dependent on when that decision is. I think what we've really changed over the years is what constitutes ripeness in a winemaker's mind, and how we are farming the grapes to achieve. We talked about this so much last week, and we'll keep coming back to this point that we don't pick grapes at lower sugar contents because we want to make lower alcohol wines. It's because we don't irrigate and the way we farm, those grapes are ripe at lower sugar contents. And it's a little bit of a hard concept, but...
I think it's right that it's a bit of a backwards way of thinking about it in a way, where there is a mindset that you'll find out there in the wine industry where, what bricks or what sugar level do you pick at? And you should be able to give just a one-word answer. Oh, we pick at 28 bricks.
Yeah.
We pick at 25 bricks. We pick at, and so we get the question, hey, what bricks do you pick at? And to be honest, I don't even know our average bricks for our Cabernet, because it's not. It's a number.
What is a brick anyway?
What is a bricks? Percentage of sugar. Percentage of soluble solids.
I almost got you.
So hey, you trying to catch me live on the internet?
I have a master's degree.
But the way we think about it, the way we think about ripeness is exactly what my dad said. Where it's more of this kind of feeling, and it's easy to kind of mistake the number that you get out of a bricks reading or out of an acid reading or a pH reading for that kind of certain. If you feel certain, okay, well at 25 bricks it's ripe. For us, I know that we've picked Cabernet anywhere between 23 bricks and 24 and a half bricks. And honestly, I don't know that it's consistent for every single block, every single year, depending on about where it ends up. It's more about this kind of feeling of ripeness that you get out of the grape, and that really takes getting boots in the ground. You need to be out there.
Well, it's a much more involved question, but the average bricks for Cabernet Sauvignon in the Napa Valley has come up from the typical 22.5, 23 degrees bricks or sugar content or soluble solids content that you would find a Frog's Leap wine at. The average now for Napa Cabs is over 28, 29 degrees of sugar. This is a potential alcohol of 15.5 or 16%. So now alcohols can be manipulated. This is something new. We can remove some of the alcohol with techniques like reverse osmosis and high-speed centrifuges and so on. We don't do that, but there is a way to get a wine very high in sugar, but reduce the alcohol mechanically. I suppose we'll have to learn how to do that someday, but...
You don't know how to do it?
No, I don't.
Come on, I'd get with it. It's the latest way.
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's the latest thing.
Yeah.
One more question, and then I think we'll flip.
Get to the important part.
Get to the part that you've been waiting for. But it's a good question. When you try a new technique, do you do it with the entire harvest or just a part?
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting question because it depends. When we're trying something that is every year we're making a change to how we ferment, whether it's different barrels or a different technique or a different, extraction regime, little, details that you can change every year. And generally that'll be on just a portion of the vintage. And we do run experiments every year, just straight up experiments.
Sorry, I kind of short-poured you.
Yeah, thank you, please. Where we'll hold different wines separately in order to try and compare them side by side. That I will give you some credit. When we made the switch to this technique with the Chardonnay, with the barrel fermentation for 5 days and then aging up necessarily in concrete, you did it on the whole thing at once. You just went all in.
That's great. But the big thing was the time on the lees, because this is going to get too involved, and we really we can come back to this another time. But when a wine ages on its lees, it can go through reductive phases where it has really bad mercaptan or sulfide type aromas. And this is very scary to a winemaker to go and taste these wines and go, oh my God, this is going to go bad. We better do something to it. And you start manipulating the wine. And really, with the Chardonnay, to go through these reductive periods, you really have to have the courage of your conviction. And the defining moment for me on this actually came tasting in Burgundy with my friend Laurent Ponceau, and we were tasting it. It was November, it's so cold, and we were tasting all of his red wines, and which is what you do in a cave in Burgundy in November. But I was really interested in white wines, so finally I said, can we taste some of your white wines? He says, no, we do not try. Well, you can't argue with a Burgundian winemaker in his own cellar, but we had lunch later on, and we drank about 30 bottles of wine, and finally I said, how come you don't let people try your white wines? He says, no, he says, I don't try my white wines until Easter, meaning he never even dipped into the barrels to try them, because he says they start smelling so bad, and until the spring when they start to resolve themselves. So I panic, and then I start to do things to the wine, so I've had to teach myself not to touch the wine. So I do that by not even smelling the wine.
It's a release of control, and it feels scary, but I think it's
like a lot of great winemaking
and a lot of great grape growing as well. Where it's not that it's unintentional. It's not that he's just doing it willy-nilly, but you have to trust the natural process.
Well, I think it's the same with wine writing, really, a lot, right? You just got to give up control and just write whatever shit comes to your mind. Do you think we should check in on that?
I think maybe we should ask an expert.
Can we? We're going to take a moment here to plug into our. We need to. These are not monocles like they were 2 weeks ago, but these are little earphones so that we can talk to our friend and colleague Eric Asimov. If you guys do not tune in to his weekly wine column called The Pour in the New York Times, you're really missing, I think, one of the most informed and wonderful voices on wine in the whole country.
And just a reminder to those of you on Instagram, we are going to cut off the Instagram feed because otherwise we get crazy audio feedback. But please join us on Zoom. Again, the link is in the Frog's Leap Instagram bio, so you can check that out. So bye to Instagram, but please join us on Zoom.
And hi to Eric. Eric, are you with us?
Yes. Hi,
John.
my
God, I thought we'd put you to sleep already.
No, I enjoyed the discussion of Chardonnay, and I was wondering what you do with those barrels after 5 days.
We just throw them away. You know, it's rich. You know,
we're in that way. You know,
it's so prices on your wine if you kept using them.
Well, in the law of unintended consequences, of course, there are barrels that we use for Cabernet Sauvignon, and which took some adjustment in our barrels selection for Cabernet Sauvignon. But these are our Cabernet Sauvignon barrels, and what we actually believe, Eric, is that we're cutting a little bit of that strong oak flavor out of our Cabernet, and so we've been allowed to actually up our percentage of new oak. Without getting that strong, toasty, burnt sort of character. So it's had a secondary and positive consequence. But how are you anyway? What is that in behind you there?
I'm very well. I'm sitting in front of the Sonoma coast here.
Sonoma?
That's Gateway to.
I know.
That's Gateway. Now I understand. And over the hill. Yeah. I usually lock my doors whenever I go over there. So.
It does remind me of better times.
Yes, indeed.
Showing you the streets of Manhattan.
Yeah, so talk to us a little about this. You're really in the center of all of what's going on in New York. Our heart goes out to everyone in New York, but it's all of us now, of course. But you guys have taken it extra hard.
We're all in it together. It's kind of a bizarre life right now. It's a little bit easier in the countryside, but I I go out of doors once a week now, and I've got to get my mask on and my gloves and call in my order at the grocery store and pick it up and
we're all learning about this, but you guys have been doing it for a while. Well, obviously our good feelings are with everyone there. So Eric, thanks for joining us. We've been having a lot of fun with these. As you know, wineries are finding new ways to connect with their consumers and the people who love their wine. And
I think we're all honing our Zoom skills now.
I like the idea that you can put in a background. We didn't know that you could do that, so we got to check that out.
You got to get your technical advisor on it. We would be instead of a blank wall, we'd be looking at the.
I kind of like that. I kind of like the halo around.
See, he likes the glow behind him.
It goes with the hair. So.
I think you can arrange for that. If you are put the Sea of Galilee behind you, or
we can go a little on the nose. But,
easy now. Now everyone knows Eric, and I know this book has been out for a while, right? When did you write this?
Yes, it's since 2012.
2012, yeah.
So, I mean, it's ancient.
Well, it is. Have you got another book on the way?
That would be a little grandiose and optimistic, but I'm working on it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I've read a lot of wine books, as you can imagine, over the 50 years, but I found this book to be very, very instructive, and I'm hoping that we can call you out on at least one chapter in here, because, and honestly, this is anyone who doesn't have, it's still available, isn't it? Or you can download it as an audio
it's, you can get it at all the independent bookstore websites and anywhere else where you get your books.
It's a little expensive, but I really
has passed since publication, though, that I can feel free to disagree with myself if
well,
necessary.
fair enough. But the chapter I want to talk about really briefly here, if we can, is your very first chapter in a book called Wine Anxiety. Wine Anxiety. Let me have a little simple wine. Which is hard to say, but I think it's something that we deal with here as we've been getting in questions. People are always concerned about what wine glass to use, or what wine, how long should I age this wine? And you get those questions all the time, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, more than any other kind of question. And it's, we've constructed a kind of cult of connoisseurship around wine.
Right.
So it gives people the feeling, if they don't know everything about it, that they're going to make mistakes,
right.
And mistakes are going to cause shame. Nobody wants to experience that.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate, because I think it diminishes a little of the pleasure people could easily get out of wine. And I think we could enjoy wine a lot more if we just knock it off the pedestal and stop, treating it as a work of art, but it's a staple on the table and something to be enjoyed.
Yeah, okay, so a devil's advocate on that. A lot of people, the pleasure they get out of it is spending too much money and having the only bottle available amongst their friends too, right? So there is that segment of the...
Well, it's not
I got the Romani Conti and you didn't, right?
No, it's not to say that everybody feels...
I've never gotten the Romani Conti,
but you're talking about people who have taken the trouble to learn a lot about it and have found that wine occupies a very important place in their life.
Yeah.
But for people who are just kind of on the boundary and hear a lot about wine but are a little bit afraid of it, I would prefer to give them an invitation to enjoy it than an invitation to learn how to appreciate it properly.
Got it. Yeah. No, and I think you've been fairly consistent with that view, and it's really the foundation of what you write about on a regular basis. That you explore topics of wine that no other wine critic really does. I mean, your approach is but I think the people are coming around to this. In fact, you were just out here for a seminar about how wine writing and journalism is changing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Every year there's a symposium for professional wine writers out in Napa Valley, and this year there was a hiatus, and some people who have attended the seminar before got together and just discussed what the future is. And that's a discussion that's maybe a little bit more about the future of journalism than it is about wine.
Yeah. Because,
our journalistic world has changed so much in the last 20 years. And, you can tell 25 years ago, there were wine writers for just about every publication. Now, most newspapers are lucky to have any cultural writers at all, much less wine writers.
Right.
So, how in the future are people going to be able to write and discuss wine in a professional way? Yeah. It's an ongoing problem.
Yeah.
Were there any takeaways from, kind of what you feel, or do you have any personal stance on what you feel like the future of wine journalism is?
Well, I think that there's always going to be a market for expertise and opinion. Mm-hmm. People want to be inspired about wine. I think they want to be made curious about new and different kinds of wines, different facets of the wine itself and the culture of it that they hadn't thought about before. And so there's always going to be a market for that. How people are going to get paid to provide that is something
You get paid?
I occupy, a very privileged position. We have, as near as I can tell, there are 2 wine critics on the staffs of American newspapers in the entire country.
Yeah.
Esther Mobley at the Chronicle and me.
Right.
And, so we're kind of, we got the 2 lucky spots. We sat down when we knew when to sit down when the music stopped. And, the question is how to add more chairs. And that I'm not really sure.
Eric, you talk in your book, you have a fantastic kind of set of passages really about talking about certainty with wine, about how, this kind of draws off of, point scores, which we love to lampoon with our 100-point cards and things like that. And there's about the desire in wine to, hey, I know that I'm using the right glass. I know that this is the wine to pair with this meal. I know that this wine is better than that wine.
I aged it for the exact number of days.
The exact number of years to age a particular wine. And that, that certainty is very fulfilling in a way where we crave certainty about a very complex topic like wine can be. And it's curious to me because you're all of the wine school, which if you guys watching haven't read some of his wine school articles on the New York Times wine section, they're absolutely fabulous. I think one of my favorite things about them is that the tone in which they're written is more of a conversation than it is a sort of, hey, this is how it's got to be, or this is how this particular wine is. You sprinkle in details and you talk about aspects of these areas of all the different regions that you're exploring that maybe you can help people understand as an expert in wine, but there's this very deliberate kind of stepping back from the telling people what to think. And I'm wondering if do you feel the pressure to write with more of this kind of, to write with more certainty about wine, about expressing hard opinions, even if not in the form of a point score or something like that? Or do you feel what kind of response do you get to those kinds of articles? Do people want to get your hard opinion more, or do you feel like that's a path forward for better understanding of wine?
I definitely think it's a path forward for really understanding wine on a more intuitive level. It's a little bit like you were discussing relieving yourself of control in making Chardonnay. If you can step back for a moment and maybe see where the wine is going to go and follow it there, assuming that you've done everything right, you may have end up with a better wine than if you are try to control every aspect of it in advance. And I think one of the beautiful things about good wine is that we don't know everything about it. And we have to admit that. And it's a little bit, not being omniscient for a wine critic is a little bit like not being, certain if you're a politician. It's more honest. Even
you're a flip-flopper. Yeah.
Well, I think it's more honest to look at the gray areas and acknowledge them. But it's probably, the public, a significant part of the public likes the louder voice and the more certain opinions, even if they can't be defended intellectually. Yeah. So, people will choose to take that stance, to play the authority because they know that there's a professional benefit there. But I think that if you're really being honest about wine and being honest about oneself, we don't know everything about wine. We can give you best guesses, educated guesses about how long to age this wine, when it's going to be really good. But the sort of definitive notion that, this wine will be at its apex in 10 years is ridiculous, because you have to acknowledge that a wine has many different peaks, and it depends on how you enjoy wine. Some people love wine when it's young and vibrantly fruity, and other people like all of the the tertiary complexity. So
some of us like them all.
and some of us like them all, right? So these are all matters of taste and matters of opinion, and that doesn't mean that every opinion is equal, because some opinions can be defended better than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just a little bit more honest about one's own abilities, and also about wine itself. It doesn't behave in predictable ways always, unless it's not good wine.
Well, there is.
I guess it still does exist out there.
Not here, of course. No, never. We would never do that
No,
here.
it's 100 points. Come on.
100 points.
No, when next week when you taste your Merlots 10 years apart,
yeah,
you're going to learn something, I'm sure.
Yeah, just how awesome we are.
Mostly how really good we actually are. Now, you're also not unwilling to take on subjects that are more controversial in the wine industry, and I'm thinking about your 4-part series about climate change. To my mind, no other wine journalist in the world has put their toe as deeply into that pond and exposed as much of what's going on as you did in that 4-part series. And by the way, to anyone out there listening to us, I'm still sure you can drag up that information. Eric did a 4-part series on climate change, and I thought it was one of the most. I really think it was a great thing what you did there. I'm interested in what feedback you got from that, and what you learned from it, and what your experience was. We got to get to some questions, but could you address that the experience that came out of that?
Well, thank you. I mean, certainly it made me more conscious of how, almost every little thing we do is somehow directly or indirectly related to the environment and to climate in ways that we don't always consider. And, I think the reaction, some people really found it eye-opening to see how each of these decisions can be important. And, in one way, you could say the wine industry is relatively unimportant in the climate change discussion, because look at the petroleum industry, airlines, travel, big ag, and so on. But I think for many people, and certainly here in New York City, wine is kind of your single window onto the world of agriculture, and it's been a leading edge in a lot of ways. I think that people learn about organic farming. They learn about biodynamic farming through wine, dry farming,
regenerative farming,
regenerative farming, because wine is this window into all of these different agricultural practices that in our urban world we don't really see. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people found it to be interesting, educational, eye-opening, and I would like to think that, although we have now a more immediate crisis that we're all dealing with, the whole climate discussion is not going to get lost, because it's not going away.
Well, and I think we'd be well advised to link those two, the two events.
I think a lot of people would make that argument that, in the kind of human indifference to the natural world, we, in a sense, have caused this pandemic, and And if we were a little bit more thoughtful and careful in how we interacted with nature, if we didn't, getting back to the question of control, if we didn't assume that it is ours to control and play with however we like, it's possible it never would have happened. I mean, it's not sure, but.
Yeah. No, I think it's really good points. We can talk with you all day, but I'm sure some questions are coming up. Yeah. So any good ones? No, we're all good. You've got Eric Asimov, the world's most famous wine criticizer, on the line here, folks. Let's get a couple questions here for Eric.
Maybe the most famous one on this Zoom chat.
Well, that's what we meant. What other world is there?
I know. There's no world outside of this. There's an interesting question here. I seem to recall reading Eric's articles in the New York Times that he's discussed as well, including a great article written a while ago where he featured Frogsleep, Coruscant, and Camus. That was written probably 10 years ago. I think that was the one you wrote in 2008, a while back, about kind of a classical style Napa Cabernets.
Yeah.
And the question is how much, if anything, is changed in regards to winemaking, especially kind of in the vein of what you were talking about, and that. And, that's something you get kind of a top-down view on all of that, and we've got our own opinions as makers of old school Cabernet, but sometimes I wake up and I feel a little cynical about the world of winemaking.
But I think that story had a profound effect, and I think that we have seen change. But it'd be interesting to see your
perspective. I think for people who don't remember that article, 2008 was kind of the middle of the Parker, the height of the Parker influence. And the Wine Spectator influence. I call it the
steroids era.
The steroids era, yeah. What John Kongsgaard used to call the 30 Bricks boys. When the style of wine, particularly in Napa, that was most critically rewarded were these big, powerful, alcoholic, oak and fruit bombs. It was the era of the cult Cabernet. Not that all of them were like that, but the kind of classical structure of Cabernet Sauvignon was kind of out the window. And that was my article kind of bemoaning the disappearance of classically structured Cabernets and coming out to Napa to find a few of them that were still there, but maybe not as celebrated as they ought to have been. And I think that, across California, there's been a tremendous change since then, where far more producers and far more consumers are concerned with balanced wines and classically shaped wines. It may be that Napa Valley is kind of on the tail end of that because those big wines were so successful, and there's still a lot of money to be made making them. You would know better than I do.
What do you think is kind of driven that change? I mean, other than your article, of course, that you wrote in 2008. I mean, is it wine consumers driving that change, or I feel like you're hitting on kind of some things that I agree with, which is that you find more diversity out there, you find more diversity in winemaking styles, including some more restrained styles out there. Is that do you think that what do you think is driving that kind of change?
Well, I think the main thing, two main things. First, there's been a far greater diversity of critical voices than there was, 15 or 20 years ago. And, you can attribute that to high-speed internet and the fact that it's become ubiquitous, and you can read so many more opinions. So the critical hegemony of Parker and the Wine Spectator has been kind of decentralized. So you don't have that single opinion kind of being as commercially crucial to people's businesses. At least that's my opinion. You can tell me whether you think that's true or not.
We might be the last people to tell you that's true, or we would be the last to know, but I think it's probably a good point, yeah.
I also think that you've got, you know, a new generation of winemakers in California who have had wine from all over the world. And I mean, John, you're kind of an exception. I mean, you're friends with Laurent Ponceau and Dominique Lafont, but you've been around, you've explored, you've tasted widely. You know, there used to be quite a number of provincial winemakers in California. And I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean who hadn't tasted anything else other than what was made by their colleagues.
Right.
And so I mean, it's shocking to me, but you know, I met Pinot Noir producers who were making, you know, 15%, 16% Pinot Noirs, who pretty much had never tried Burgundy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
they only drink Pinot Noir.
You don't have to, right? You don't have to love Burgundy. You don't have to want to imitate Burgundy, but you have to be intellectually curious about it. Yeah. And I do think that there's a much more widely traveled, better educated generation of people making wine in California. And I don't, you know, that's not exclusive to California. That's true all over the world, including Burgundy, where, you know, the children of vignerons there routinely now go to spend a year in California or in New Zealand, or in Italy, and you know, get a sense of what else is going on in the world, you know, rather than having these insular communities who don't know and don't care.
Yeah, no, that's really good points.
Those kinds of insular communities tend to breed certainty in a way where it's sort of like, what I'm doing is the right way to do it, and that's the only way to do it.
I mean, there's you know, there's still a number of people probably in Napa Valley who think, you know, they're in God's chosen place to make great Cabernet, and I would say it's just one of God's chosen places. You have to acknowledge that.
I have to say that, you know, reading old Gerald Asher gourmet magazine articles and so on and so forth, and even Kermit Lynch, the wine travels of Kermit Lynch, he would come around vignerons who hadn't been exposed to the other wines in the world, but were so in touch with their own land and so on that there was a purity about that as well. So it could be that you can be too highly, if you're too highly influenced by other people's opinion about how you should make your wine, that could be a negative too, don't you think?
You know, I understand what you're saying, but I think the qualities that those people had were that they were living in communities that for centuries had traditions of farming, grape growing, and winemaking. And, you know, that's part of what I mean when I say that wine is a cultural expression. We in the United States don't always come at it from that point of view. It's much more of an entrepreneurial decision-making is entrepreneurial rather than culturally driven. Yeah. And so we don't really have that generational experience. And so we have to make a lot of crucial ground up decisions that are not informed by anything other than critic scores and things like that, and dollar signs.
I think that's a very, very fair analysis of that. Yeah, maybe maybe I would love to think that the future is that we develop more of that cultural reference here in Napa, and that could be a bigger part of it. Maybe this is a good example of it, right?
I think it is a good example of it. And I have to give a shout out, if it's not inappropriate, to Rory's Calder label, which
not inappropriate at all, according to me. Yeah.
Which does explore the history of Napa Valley, beyond 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to know about that, and it's great to it just gives added dimension to the culture of Napa Valley winemaking, beyond faux villas and here's what we do for charity and so on.
Well, we are looking forward to a session where we can get a few of your colleagues who are in that
doing those kinds of things, whether with Cabernet or other varieties. It's definitely going on. It's an exciting time for that kind of expression.
Well, believe it or not, we're running out of time, but let's see if we got one or two more good questions here.
Eric, I think there's an interesting question that's a pretty broad topic, which is, Eric, can you tell us about your professional journey to becoming a wine critic? And I know that probably a long story. I know that you talked in your book about starting off as partially as a restaurant critic, right, for the Times. And it's interesting to me because you just wrote a whole article on food and wine pairing, and I'm curious about carry that development, not just how you got started with wine criticism, but how does your relationship with food and all of that carried through your wine writing over the years, and has that changed at all?
I don't think it has, actually. I mean, I got very interested as a teenager in food, and wine was always a part of that. It was always something that was on the table. And, as a student with a small budget, I learned about wine from the bottom up. I'm still kind of on the bottom, still having a small budget. But I became a food writer at an early age, and I was very interested in wine, but we had a wine writer at the Times, and there were fewer opportunities. Frank Pryle was the critic. For anybody who remembers him. He was a great wine writer, and maybe not as well remembered as he ought to be. But I reviewed restaurants for the Times throughout the 90s, and started writing about wine as well when Frank started to wind his career back and became a full-time wine critic in 2004. And I would say I've never had any professional wine training. I'm not I didn't learn how to be a sommelier or a master of wine. And I think that my experience informs me right up until that article that Rory referenced about pairing food and wine. I think that the best way to learn how to do this is not by studying charts and flavor matches and different graphs and tables, but strictly through experience. The more different sorts of wines you drink with the more different kinds of foods, you begin to develop an intuitive sense of what might go best. And there's never any one answer. A lot of things go well. And it gets back to our discussion of anxiety before. I think people are concerned about making a mistake with food and wine. They don't want to pick the wrong wine. And, I think that mistakes are not really mistakes. They help us learn. And, what's the worst that can happen? Instead of the magic of a synchronized dinner between food and wine, you've got wine and food that may not go together all that well, but they're still great.
Hey, there's still wine and there's still
food. You got something for tomorrow. Yeah. I think that's an important point that that's why I loved the article you wrote about pairing food and wine. Is just do it. Go cook some food and go pop some bottles, and it really can't go that wrong. I mean, you can have something that's maybe not optimal or doesn't taste optimal, but yeah, just drink it tomorrow morning.
I just have to interrupt for a second because it's 7 p.m. here in Manhattan. And this is the time every day when everybody here starts applauding our healthcare workers.
Well, please go and do that. And
in my apartment, I'm hearing people, they're beating on the cowbell and yelling on the streets, and it's becoming a nightly thing.
It's so incredible. It's so incredible. What amazing times we're in. I hope we can all draw from this. We have wasted another perfectly good hour.
Yes,
and we've got questions lined up here for hours to come. We knew this was going to be a very popular session with you, Eric, and hopefully we can lure you back in some other time because
nothing would give me greater pleasure than wasting another hour with the book.
And we'll get you a Napa background next time.
We'll get you a proper background here.
Yeah. Please, our great wishes to you and your family. I know your two sons both live in New York. Is that correct?
Well, one of them lives here in Brooklyn. The other one is a graduate student at Cambridge in the UK.
Oh, that's right. So
they're both hunkered down with their partners and riding it out like all of us.
Yeah. He has a very underachieving family. Well, thank you so much for this. It's really been great to have your voice join ours. We're having a lot of fun with this, and we'll get you back another time and have some more fun with this. People have got their dinners waiting. They've got more wine to drink, and so we're going to sign off. But thank you so much for joining us, Eric, and all of our listeners. Sorry we didn't get to all your unbelievably good questions. We'll try to correspond with you as the week goes along. We have a great session next week with the Merlots, and then
wait, we're drinking Merlot?
Oh, I'm not drinking that right now. What a great topic. I can't wait to talk about Merlot. And so that's next week, and then sustainability the week after that. So keep with us, you guys. 650 strong today. Thank you so much for joining us. And a little applause for Eric, okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
so
to you,
much.
Eric.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care.